For my painting classes, I'm working with animals this time around, and the previous class I gave all of you some images to do some quick sketches from. Now we're going to develop that into a larger full-size painting. I'm doing two different ones for my different classes. This one, I'm doing a silhouette of the dog against a background. My other class, we're actually doing the portrait. We're doing the portrait of a dog. So I'll probably share these back and forth with you guys, but let's go work on this. So the idea here is that I need to be able to enlarge this to the full size of what my painting is going to be. I'm going to be working on a 12 by 9 inch block, and my photograph was only 10 inches wide, and I'm actually going to make it just a little bit wider off this side than what the photograph was. And then to determine how high it should be so it'll fit into the same proportions, I can take my photograph and put it down into one corner of my finished size, and then I'm going to run a diagonal through here. I ran off with my other diagonal. We can do it this way. If I put these two together, it works. So if I run this through here, put this together. So I'm holding this together so that it makes a nice diagonal. And we've got to get that down into that corner. So when I run this through here, and I've got this other one lined up, this ends up right here on my photograph, which is, turns out it's 7¼ inches up to that point. And so I mark this across here, and then I'm going to come through and I'm going to divide this into 4 equal parts. I'm going to divide that into 4 equal parts. And so we're only going up to this line right here. Actually finishes right at that corner. I left it on there so that you can see what the amount is. Okay, so I've divided that into 4 equal parts. I've divided this into 4 equal parts. And I'm now going to finish putting these lines in here. So 9 by 12 is pretty easy to divide into 4 equal parts. You know, 12 divided by 4 is 3. 9 divided by 12 or by 4 is 2¼ and so this is 2¼ inches here, this is 3 inches here, each of those blocks. So now that I've got my proportions the same and I've got my lines drawn on here, I can then transfer this information onto my piece. This line runs right through the dock. Okay, so the dock comes through here, and it is a little less than halfway. It's about 1/3 here, and then it comes out to halfway through that point there. So we're going to have this mark right here for the dock. And then my horizon line is a little bit below. How much below? That's half. It's less than 1/4 below this. So if that's half, that's 1/4. This is less than 1/4. My horizon line is going to be about there. And so now I'm going to run it parallel because a horizon is always parallel when it's that far away. So that's my horizon. So this is horizon. And then my trees on this, they're going to come up halfway, a little less than halfway. A little less than halfway. So they're about that high. They come through here, they come down, and then there's some tall ones here. They come down, then they come back up. And I can always vary this a little bit. It doesn't have to be exactly like that. Those trees, and then they come down, they come back up. And then the reflection is directly underneath. So that reflection comes underneath there. This shape has to be there. My skinny stays the same. So it's as though you took and folded it right on that horizon line, and you get that exact same thing on the other side. And then, so if this tree is a little more like that, this tree is going to be a little more like that. This one's going to be a little skinnier, and maybe there's a third one there. And that little piece right underneath of there. So that's my horizon put in. Now for our dog, where's a good place to start with him? This point is right here. So this point and this point are the same one. His chest here, it's about a third of the way down. And there's just a little V right there. It's down at the bottom. His foot crosses over, comes just a little ways out there, and then, so let's see, that's that little V. His leg comes out and comes to just right behind here, and a little behind this line is this other V. So we're doing like a negative, and he's got a little dew claw right there. And then his body, this is halfway, that's half. He's a little above half. This line is actually going to come through there. Okay, and that is about a third of the way over. So there's his belly. And then his leg back here crosses, and there's a little bit, this comes down maybe a quarter of the way. So that's going to be his foot there. Turn up and come into there. And then this comes back and it touches just into that at, yes, about a third of the way up. This other leg comes down. And now this foot is just underneath of and just short of that line. So it's so handy to have references that you can then say, okay, this goes about there. Much easier to figure it out this way. And then that's half. So this is a little less than a quarter. So that's half, a little less than a quarter. So his butt is about there. There's a little mark into it there. This comes up. And then his tail, his tail runs in at about halfway here when it crosses. And let's see, that's horizon. This is my, let's put them, and it's going to come right up into there. His tail's going to come in here at this butt. And then this comes up and over that dark that we had, and just under that tree, and then let's see, half, a little less than half. So this is half, a little less than half is going to be about here. It's a little dip down and then a little rise up where his shoulders come into his back. And this continues down on this sort of line down, and then his head, it's a little more than halfway. Here's halfway, a little more than halfway, so that crosses about there. And then comes up and it's sort of square across the top of his head and then joins into that. And now it's about that much down. How far away from here is this? Okay, this comes up like this. His collar comes into there. It's almost parallel. These two lines are almost parallel. And then his nose is a little fatter than his lower jaw, although they're both relatively big. And there we've got the outline of the dog on here. And then the dog, yeah, we've got that dog identified. This is maybe a little skinnier right there, because that didn't look quite right. We have to know that this leg is going to come back into here. And it doesn't show as well on this photograph. It'll show better on the bigger one that I give you. This butt is out in here, and this leg comes up in here somewhere. Maybe a little more like that, because that's going to be his shoulder there. And then he's got this collar that wraps around down through here. And that's about all the information that we can really see here. And so everything else is just silhouette. And maybe this comes a little narrower there, and give a little more space for that foot and let that angle down a little more there. All right. Can barely, well, in the photograph I can see his ear better. So his ear goes there, and I will be giving you a good photograph to be able to work from. Okay, so there we go. A silhouette of dog, the background piece. So now this is ready to transfer onto my watercolor paper, because this is all the information I'm going to want on the watercolor paper. It's just the outline of the dog, the outline of what my horizon information looks like. So we'll stop here, and then I'll transfer it on the watercolor paper with a graphite transfer paper, and we'll be ready to paint. I have the drawing almost completed on here, but I thought maybe I should put it on the video just a little bit to show you for sure how this works. So my drawing is here on my page. I have a piece of graphite transfer paper here with the graphite on the bottom side, and then I have my block of watercolor paper underneath. And I'm having to make sure that I've really marked this hard enough, and I might need to come back and mark it a little bit harder because I'm not seeing it really well down there. Let's try that and see if that's a little better, a little more pressure on that. Yeah, that's a little better. And let's do that a little more down in here. The most important thing is that I get this dog in here and my horizon in about the right place. That the rest of the trees I can fake, except for the fact that what's up above has to be mirrored down below. What's up above is mirrored down below. My graphite paper is starting to get older and it doesn't have as much graphite on it. Some of the new graphite paper apparently is very thick with graphite, and you end up with a pretty dark line. So it's really wise to double check how much graphite has come down and then adjust how hard or soft you press depending on how well your graphite is transferring. Okay, now I did move this up. I moved the drawing down just a little bit to take a little more of the dog off of here. It gives a little more sky at the top. So it just felt like he was too centered in the page, and I wanted to move him a little further so he was over this way just a bit. All right, so that's going to be ready to paint on now. Painting, I now need to think about how am I really going to do this and what's the best way, and why would I do one thing before another. And the dog is almost a silhouette. It's pretty dark, so I can put it over top of almost anything that I put in the back. The only thing I need to worry about is where a hard line, like this little hard line, goes through his tail, or if there's some other hard lines that might show. But I can always do a little lift on those before I put him down to make sure that I don't end up with something showing through from underneath that I don't want. So that said, my feeling on this painting is that I want to start it with a wet and wet and do a relatively loose background back in here. I probably get that little horizon of the lake and the feeling of the reflection of the water because he is on a dock, and I like the idea that he's standing right by the water here. The other thing that's important is that it's probably evening time, and I'm getting a little bit of gold light coming through the silhouettes of these trees and having it reflect down into the water down here. So that's something I can play with in the wet and wet. Now, when I do the wet and wet, how do I want to do that? What's going to be important about it? Now, I'm seeing the sky above here having almost a pinkish goldy glow to it, and then it's going to shift down and be fairly blue down in here. And maybe there were some high clouds, I'm not sure. But the area in the middle here is relatively light except for these colors that are coming through behind the trees. So that would be my first layer. My second layer, I'd come back in and do these darker trees, get them in place, do the reflection of the darker pieces in the water, maybe build this up down here a little bit more. The dock could almost go in before he does, but it doesn't have to. It could be done when at the same time as the dog. So that's sort of my process. As I go along, I might find I need to change it. You know, this water in here, I think that might be a lift that we'll do because I want soft edges on it. So anyway, let's go ahead and dive in and get that first layer down. Now with wetting my surface here, I need my paints mixed up over here. So what colors are we doing? This foreground is sort of a turquoisey blue green, and I think, you know, phthalo blue might work fairly well with this. Phthalo blue, but it's got to get toned down a little bit because it's not that bright. So if I add burnt sienna to it, if you probably remember, it will make it more of a green gray. And let's just put this on a sample. Yeah, I think I'm liking that color. If I need to make it a little bit more blue, I could add cobalt to it or ultramarine. I could even come back in and put just a touch more phthalo in there. Maybe make it a little bit thicker. Yeah, let's make it just a little bit thicker. This is a little more of a turquoisey color. Yeah, okay, we'll leave a little bit more turquoisey color. So that's the color that I'm going to be feeding into the water. And then up above, we are going to have a little bit of an orangey glow to that. Let's just do a little bit of New Gamboge, a little New Gamboge with, and I want to make it peachy, so put a little bit of quinacridone rose with it. Boy, my quinacridone rose is just about out in my pan. I'm going to have to refill that before I do a whole lot more. So put a little off to the side so we don't get too much at once. Yeah, I think I like that little bit of a peachy color. Okay, so those are sort of my two main colors, and then we're going to go with a little darker peach after I've got that down, because in this area where we have the trees, I'm going to want to put in some thicker, darker color after we've put the wash on. So my water here is slightly dirty, but not bad. None of this is a real bright color, so I think this very pale blue-green in my water, this pale blue-green in my water shouldn't be a problem. I'm going to wet my brush, take a little bit of it off just so I can control it, and then come in, and I want to wet this so that I have a nice even amount of water over the entire surface. Now I do have a tissue here, so I can pull a little bit off of the dog if I need to across his back. But it also has a little glow, and I could almost put a little bit of that orangey color right down into that dog because, you know, sort of the goldy yellow color into the dog, because he's got that color across his top. Now I'm going to turn sideways and look at this and see if I have any dry holes, which I do right there. Now, when you're doing a wet and wet, you can either leave it flat, or I'm leaving it with a little bit of an angle here so that I know which way it's running. And we're going to start with this yellowy gold up here in the sky. It's pretty pale in the middle. I almost don't need to put any color in there. My rag is my friend, so I use that rag to take any excess water off of my brush. I'm feeling like it's gotten a little too much water on these edges as I pulled that across. I'm working on a, let's see, it's a 9 by 12. I'm pretty sure it's a 9 by 12. Let's just look at it. Yes, 9 inches by 12 inch piece, so it's not a really big piece. Now let's get down into this goldy color down in here. It's darkest down here. And you know, I'm going to turn this because that way I can let this bead a little bit down into here without it rolling back in. So it can be darkest right here at the top. There's a hair in here too. Ah, good, it came off fairly easily. I do not want to put my finger in there to get that hair off. You want to do it with a brush. And if it doesn't come off easy, then don't worry about it and just let it go. Now I have to go all the way from side to side here or I end up with brush marks. Like that little brush mark. Okay, so that looks good. Now, I can go blue underneath of him because he is brown, and brown has blue in it, so it's not going to be a problem at all. So now I want to come in and do some little bit more intense colors of New Gamboge in here, and I want it thick but not too thick. So my trees, yes, this is going to be pretty in here. My trees in here and trees down here, and then this will come right in and on him. Let's let him have a little of this gold all the way across the top of his body. When I like how that's feeding across there, let that run across through there. Yellow is not a very dark color. It will, what do I want to say, get a little thinner with time. And put a little bit more in there, and oh, this gold is just, so I'm wanting to put this gold on now because I want it to glow back behind all of those trees. And this area right here is where the sun is setting, and so it's going to be the most intense. I can come down into some trees there. And if I feel like maybe I got too much on, I can come in now, rinse my brush, dry it, and then come in and maybe with that damp brush, just pick up some of this paint. It's an almost dry brush, but still a little bit damp. And just let that glow across through there. And I don't care if there's a little bit more there, that's fine. And maybe there's a little feeling of this back end there. Now at this point, I could come in and do, it's a relatively warm day today. So with it being a relatively warm day, and actually there's some areas right close to that horizon over there that have color in them. So let's just, but what I was starting to say with a warm day, it's a relatively warm day today. So this is drying pretty quickly. And oh, you know where else I want some yellowy glow is right under his belly here and around that edge. And then let's just sort of try and grade this slightly up into his body so there isn't a hard line there. But he's backlit, but he's got a little thin fur on the edge of him. And so that thin fur is going to show this goldy color. And I got a little too far out there. You can see it's very easy to lift off and make things lighter here. And you know, maybe since we're feeling like maybe we want to make sure that this is not too dark on his back right there, I'm going to do a little lift there. Also seeing a spot in the water behind that could be slightly lighter there. Okay, and let's just take this up into there a little bit more. This is with a damp brush, it's not a real wet brush. With the damp brush I can move this around without creating a lot of problems. Okay, now a little bit of green in here, but I don't want it too bright. I'm going to add a little bit of burnt sienna to it. This was some sap green that I already had a little burnt sienna in. I'm putting a little bit more in, and I can start doing some of these trees. Because it's pretty warm today and it's drying fairly quickly, I can come in and do a bit more of this, where if it was a cooler day and it was really still pretty wet, I'd be afraid to come in and do this. There's going to be another row of trees there that's a little bit different color. So, and then this is drying enough so that it still gets this sort of wet look to it, but I can leave holes. And I'm just wanting to leave some tree holes there, sky holes. But it's not going to bleed into the other because it is pretty warm today. And as this gets closer and closer into the center, I need to have more and more of this gold color. Actually, the gold color with a little brown in it. A little bit of glow here. Ah, yes, a little glow. That's a nice little glow. And then there's some green sort of in front of these. All right. I have to sort of decide how far I'm going to go with this. I want to get some of this in now, but and as it gets further and further away from the sunny area, it's going to turn a little more greenish, maybe a little more blue in that green. And now this other green tree, it's dried a little more, and I can go ahead and put that in and bring it down to that water line, and then it's reflected in the water, so it can go right in underneath of there. Take that one down so it goes in there. I think there's some buildings back here, but I'm going to ignore them. I think they'd be too hard to deal with. We don't need them anyway. And I can see that I've got a wet-dry situation happening here, and I want to let those work together. So this wet and wet game, you can actually come in, if it's like this where it's drying relatively quickly, you can come in and slowly add more color into here without any trouble. And the quicker it dries, the harder those edges become. And if it's a little bit wet still, then you get soft edges when it comes together. This guy's tail, I'm just sort of painting around it now. I actually, let me just paint across that tail part way. And I just want to do it a little uneven there at the bottom. And then as these trees get further out here, they get a little bluer. Just a little water in here, a little softening, and then I'll come back in and I'll do a much darker, harder layer on this after this dries. And this is going to go in darker here, and let's just take this right down his tail, but still leave that goldy glow on the top of it. So the reason I want to take that down his tail is, remember we were talking about that hard line that would run across through there? I don't want that to happen. And so taking some of that color into what's going to become his brown tail is a way to keep that from being a place where I'm going to have a hard line. And I don't want a hard line. But I do want a hard line on the edge of his back here, and I just did a mark that I don't like because it cut into what should be his back. Come in with a clean tissue just to pick that up and clean that up. Okay. I have a feeling I should stop now because I'm starting to do some things that I think I shouldn't do, like get green paint right there. That should be clear water there. Okay, I'm going to stop at this point just because it's drying pretty quickly and my concentration is going a little bit. I will need to come back in and do more work on this. We've still got... There's quite a bit that I actually could do, and let's just, so these trees are going to be coming down, and I could have had more gold back in behind this, couldn't I? These trees are going to come right down in, and they actually come down and touch his head there. And take that right up into that. And let's make this a little more goldish right here. Just putting straight new gamboge in on the edges of this. what do those edges look like? And there's a light spot there, so that needs to stay light. I like this sort of light dark and having some of the dark coming down and touching his body at other areas of light so that he'll stand out against a lighter background. Now this seems mid-tone here. This is, you know, it's not too dark. And now while this is still wet, let's come in with this tissue and see if I can do a little lift. I might have to come back with Mr. Clean Magic Eraser in the end, but I can do a little bit of a lift right through here. Some of that's not wet enough for me to do it, so let me just wet this down a little bit. So, you know, these are the wind lines that are happening through here. So we're just lifting that out of there. Okay, that looks good. And I can do more of that later. After it's completely dried is going to be our other good time to do this. And probably a better time than right now. We get some interesting things happening here. I actually like what's happening with the fact that this was wet against a slightly drier position, and we get a little dark line above this little set of trees, which is sort of nice, And let's just come back in here. Because some of this bleeds down into this water down below, and I'm just going to let that sort of bleed down into that water down below. So, you know, as this dries, there's a certain amount that you can just keep working it if the area underneath is dried a little bit, like it has now. This is a pretty dark passage that we're putting in here. So I'm continuing to work when maybe I should have stopped for you. So let's stop right now. This is a place where I can stop and let you work on this up to this point if you want to do it simultaneously with me. So I'm going to stop. I will have to do some lifting later. This horizon is no longer very straight, and I'll need to straighten that out, but that is a thing to do later. Okay.